Right, the Prime Minister has refused to rule out breaking his manifesto tax promises in next month's budget.
So Keir Starmer dodged questions around increases to income tax, VAT and national insurance in the House of Commons yesterday. It's only fueled speculation that tax rises and a breaking of the manifesto are now inevitable.
Well, Shadow Chancellor Sir Mel Stride joins us now. A very good morning to you. Good to have you on the show. Let's just kick off with not necessarily the budget, first of all, but let's just clear up this story about Rachel Reeves not obtaining the correct licence when renting out her family home. It is actually a criminal offence to do that, yet the Prime Minister says that he's taken advice from his independent advisor on ministerial standards and a further investigation is not necessary because she's made an apology. That is the end of that, isn't it?
No, I don't think so. I don't think you can just have a sudden exchange of letters between Rachel Reeves and the Prime Minister and just sweep this one away. I think there needs to be a proper investigation into exactly what has happened. I mean, one thing I've been made aware of this morning is that, for example, back in early 2023, actually before the property was rented out, Rachel Reeves had been campaigning locally in Leeds to have these selective licences introduced there. So it must have been something that she was very familiar with as a concept and the implications of that under the Housing Act, and as you say, in being in breach of that, actually being a criminal offence. So I do think this needs to be looked at more closely.
But she put it in the hands of the letting agent, as many of our viewers will understand. You put it in the hands of the letting agent and you trust them and then they give you the advice. She was not told to get a licence. She's now getting one.
Well, you don't know that those are the facts, and that's why we need to have a proper look at this and a proper investigation. Look, the Prime Minister stood on the steps of Downing Street when he was elected. One of the first things he said was that he wanted to reintroduce integrity and decency to government. And if that is the case, and he stands by that position, then why should we not have a closer look at exactly what has happened here, rather than a quick exchange of letters in the hope that it will all just go away?
Let's move on to taxation. Rachel Reeves has been saying in the last couple of weeks that Brexit has hit our economy badly, that the global economy has been weaker than she expected, and all of that means that while a year ago she thought she had done her tax raising for the Parliament, she's now going to have to come back and it seems raise taxes again in this budget. Isn't that the right, sensible, rational way for a Chancellor of the Exchequer to behave? If the world changes, if the facts change, then you change your policy.
Well, good morning, Ed. I think Rachel Reeves is basically the market for blaming absolutely anybody other than herself for the terrible state that the economy is in. Now, Brexit was some considerable time ago. I think she made those remarks with regard to what appears to be probably a quite substantial downgrade on productivity forecast growth by the OBR. But, of course, those forecasts are projecting into the future and are substantially based on what the government is doing at the moment. And I don't think she can get away from the fact that she came into the election saying she wouldn't put up taxes left, right and centre. She promptly did, broke that promise, most of it landing on the shoulders of businesses, which has destroyed growth. She talked down the economy. She had gone out and borrowed vast amounts of money, spent a lot of money, which has kept inflation higher than it would otherwise be. We've got about the highest inflation in the G7 this year, and the IMF says we will do next year. And that's meant higher interest rates, whilst mounding up all this national debt, the servicing costs upon which are about 100 billion a year, or twice what we spend on defence. And we now find ourselves going into this budget all speculating about what taxes she's going to be putting up, a very uncertain environment in which businesses are really suffering. So I'm afraid all of those things are of her making.
Always frustrating when politicians blame things outside of their control for things that they have to do. Of course, you were a cabinet minister in the last Parliament with Boris Johnson and Rishi Sunak as Prime Minister. We had the biggest rise in taxation in any Parliament since the Second World War in the last Parliament. Do you remember, Mr. Stride, what you said in your 2019 election manifesto in your constituency about taxes? Did you say they were going to go up, or did you say you wanted them to come down?
So, look, I think you make a fair point, Ed, but I think there is a difference between externalities that hit the economy like, for example, something that's happened in the past, like our stepping out of the European Union, which is what Rachel Reeves is relying upon with her argument, and things that happened when we were in office, which were huge, almost once-in-a-century events. First was COVID, which led to a contraction of the UK economy by 10% overnight. And the second was the Russia-Ukraine war, which imported inflation to our shores, and many other countries as well. I think they are of a different order of magnitude.
Okay. So just to be clear what you're saying, in 2019, Mel Stride said, I'm going to cut your taxes. They then went up by the biggest amount in any parliament since the Second World War. You've given us your excuses, but yours are good excuses, and Rachel Reeves' are bad excuses. Isn't that because they're your excuses?
Yeah, no, but I don't think you can equate the two. You cannot equate Rachel Reeves saying we left the European Union some years ago and therefore we've got a problem now and going on for the next 5 years, and what happened after 2019, which was COVID came along and shrank the UK economy by 10% overnight. It needed us to go out there and spend hundreds of billions of pounds supporting the economy, supporting jobs, avoiding mass unemployment. And we did the right thing by doing that. Right. But of course, that came with a cost and it had to be paid down. And I think there's a huge difference in the magnitude of the two things that we're focusing on here.
Well, you have yourself admitted in 2023 that Brexit would have a negative impact on the economy. You said back on BBC Radio, if you create frictions between yourself and your major trading partners, you have to accept that will have an impact. That was only 2023. You too seem to be agreeing with the Governor of the Bank of England, Rachel Reeves, the OBR, that Brexit has had a very negative impact on growth in this country, and it continues to do so. And that is the context in which the current Chancellor has to make her decisions.
Well, look, you can look at the impact that Brexit may or may not have had on growth. But as I say, that is a historical event. And the OBR has already made an assessment of the impact of that, and they are baked into the OBR's current forecast. What we're talking about is something different, which is forecasting out to the future based on the policies that this government is bringing through, has already brought through, and the impact, for example, of those very high tax rises on business and therefore the health of the economy. So Rachel Reeves can't simply keep trying to pivot back to the distant past and say, oh, well, that was the problem. She's got to look to what is happening in the present, what she's done as Chancellor since the election, and the plans she has for the future. And on those measures, I'm afraid it doesn't stack up.
Just one more question, Mr. Stride, if you've got time for us. I know you've said that you're going to cut public spending by £47 billion, £22 billion in welfare cuts, also some £3 to £4 billion in cutting the immigration asylum bill. I know that your party leader has said part of the way you'll make savings is by deporting people who have actually got indefinite leave to remain. They've actually come here and they're now here legally, for the rest of their lives, paying tax. Could be doctors or nurses or teachers, our neighbours. She says that you'll deport them if they receive benefits or commit a crime or have an income below £38,700. Katie Lamb, the Shadow Home Office Minister, says that will make sure that the UK is mostly culturally coherent. Is making Britain more culturally coherent by throwing out people who currently have a right to live here for the rest of their lives? Is that part of your savings plan?
No, so those that have indefinite leave to remain can go on, of course, to get citizenship. What we are saying very clearly is if you're here and you have our ILR, as it's known, and you are a net beneficiary, you're taking more out than you're putting in, you're receiving benefits, or you commit a criminal offence, then it's not unreasonable for that person not to be in our shores. So, I think citizenship, for example, in that context, should really mean something. And when it comes to accessing our benefit system, we're very clear that it should come with citizenship. It
does seem pretty galling to many, I'm sure, that in the sentence that is, those who commit a crime or whose income falls below £38,700 for 6 months or longer, that you're equating somebody who commits a crime with somebody who is legally paying their taxes, working hard, and happens to be earning less than £38,000. You're equating those two kinds of citizenship against one another as though they're the same thing.
No, I don't think implicit in the idea of having different criteria means you equate those criteria one with the other.
Would be the same
and there's clearly,
for those people under your policy.
Well, that may be the case. There are many areas in the law where if you commit one particular offence, you get fined, and then if there are other things that you might do that are grossly worse than that particular offence, and you also get fined. But it doesn't equate the two offences themselves.
What did Katie Lamb mean by saying that it would make Britain more culturally coherent? Did she mean that there'd be fewer black or brown people?
No, I'm sure she doesn't mean that. You'd have to ask her precisely what she meant, of course. But no, what this is about is making sure that we have a society in which citizenship really matters, and that if you are to benefit from our benefit system, for example, or indeed, as we've discussed, if there is a case of somebody committing criminal offences, maybe going to prison and so on, if you're not a citizen, then, I do think that is a different category of person that's living here. Yeah.
We are being told that you have to go and we're holding you here. So we'll ask Katie Lamb what she meant by more culturally coherent. But thank you, Mel Stride, for once again appearing on our programme. We always like it.
Thanks, Ed.
Thank you.